I can destroy you right now and you know it.
Corey, I'm saying
I don't need to do that. I don't have to do that.
Corey, I'd love to see you even attempt to do something like that.
Are you kidding me?
They were America's sweethearts. The kids we watched grow up on our television screens every week. We laughed with them. We rooted for them. And then the cameras stopped rolling. What happened next to some of these child sitcom stars is not just shocking, it is heartbreaking. From fatal overdoses to prison sentences to complete mental collapses, here are 20 child sitcom stars who completely destroyed themselves after the fame ran out. 1. Dana Plato.
No, not at all. Yeah, since I was a child, I've always wanted to do Playboy because it's art. You know, what they do with the female body is just beautiful. And it's very classy.
Dana Plato played the sweet, reliable older sister Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes for 8 seasons. Teen Idol, magazine covers, the picture of wholesome television. But she admitted later she was drinking and using substances as early as 14, right in the middle of filming. When she became pregnant, she was written off the show. After that, the industry had no interest in her. She robbed a video store in Las Vegas at gunpoint in 1991 for $800 while a friend waited outside. She called a radio show the morning after her arrest, and the host's audience voted overwhelmingly that she should go to prison. She died of an overdose in 1999 at 34. Her son Tyler, who had watched his mother's decline his entire life, died of his own overdose a year later. The Drummond family that millions loved left behind nothing but wreckage. 2. Gary Coleman.
Actually, now that I'm 30 and people are catching up with my age, they actually treat me like they would treat anybody else.
You're 30,
I like it.
You're 30 years old now.
What you talking about, Willis? Gary Coleman delivered that line with such timing it became one of the most quoted phrases in television history. He was the undisputed heart of Different Strokes and one of the most recognizable children on the planet during the late 1970s and early 1980s. But by the time the show ended, he had already discovered that his parents and former manager had spent nearly all of his earnings. He sued them and won a settlement, but he never emotionally recovered from the scale of that betrayal by the people who were supposed to protect him. He worked as a security guard to pay his bills. He was arrested for punching a woman who recognized him in a parking lot. He filed for bankruptcy twice. His health, always fragile due to a serious kidney condition that had stunted his growth, kept declining regardless of everything else. He died in 2010 at 42 from a brain hemorrhage after a fall at his home. The man who made the whole country laugh spent his final years almost entirely alone, bitter and broke. 3. Todd Bridges.
But she got fired because she was pregnant.
Oh.
That's why she got fired. That's the real reason why she got fired.
Wow.
Because they couldn't have, back in those days, an unwed woman pregnant.
Todd Bridges played Willis Jackson on Different Strokes, the cool older brother adjusting to a new world of wealth and privilege. He was genuinely talented and the most grounded performer in that cast. But once the show ended, the industry offered him almost nothing, and he fell deep into crack cocaine addiction. He connected with people who had no interest in helping him survive. In 1988, he was arrested for the attempted murder of a drug dealer who had been shot multiple times in a crack house. He was acquitted after a full trial, but the damage to his reputation was severe and lasting. He fought back through years of hard rehabilitation, genuine faith, and a willingness to be honest about everything he had done wrong. He eventually wrote a memoir called Killing Willis that described just how close he came to never returning at all. His story is one of the very few on this list with a real ending rather than just a fall. 4. Anissa Jones. Anissa Jones played Buffy on Family Affair from 1966 to 1971. The cute little girl with the glasses and the doll Mrs. Beasley. The whole country loved her. The problem was Anissa hated being Buffy. She was a normal kid who wanted to grow up, but the role kept her frozen as America's eternal 6-year-old. When the show ended, she could not get other work because directors only saw Buffy. She fell into the wrong crowd fast. She shoplifted. She ran away from home. She started using heavily. On her 18th birthday, she received her trust fund from the show's earnings. The parties got worse and the substances got harder. On August 28, 1976, just weeks after turning 18, she went to a party in California and never woke up. The coroner described it as one of the most severe overdose cases he had ever seen. She was 18 years old. 5. Corey Haim. Corey Haim was one of the biggest teen stars of the 1980s. Lost Boys. Lucas. A string of teen hits. Television work, a genuine idol for an entire generation of young people. But he started using substances as a teenager and never found his way out of it. He was open about the fact that he had been sexually abused as a young actor and that the industry did absolutely nothing to protect him. He and Corey Feldman became known as the Two Coreys, a double act built on shared trauma that the entertainment world had helped create and then refused to acknowledge. He went through dozens of rehab attempts across 2 decades. Roles disappeared as his addiction made him unreliable. He died in March 2010 at 38 from pneumonia complicated by drug use. His mother was in the next room. He was found on the floor. He spent his entire adult life trying to get back to a version of himself that existed before the industry got hold of him. 6. Erin Moran. Erin Moran played Joni Cunningham on Happy Days for a decade and was beloved by millions of fans who watched her grow from a little girl into a young woman. The spin-off Joni Loves Chachi was built entirely around her, but when that show failed after 2 seasons, the work dried up almost completely. She spent years chasing roles that never materialized and watching her finances collapse around her. She reportedly lost her home and spent time living in a motel. Reports emerged in her final years of heavy alcohol use and significant physical decline that went largely unaddressed. She died in April 2017 at 56 from complications related to throat cancer. But the years before her death had been marked by poverty and isolation that her Happy Days family had no real idea about until it was far too late. Hollywood gave Joni Cunningham the world. Hollywood then pretended she did not exist. 7. Dustin Diamond. Dustin Diamond played Screech on Saved by the Bell and was one of the most recognizable faces of 1990s Saturday morning television. But while his co-stars transitioned into adult careers, Dustin struggled badly. He released a tell-all book that torched his relationships with nearly every former cast member. In 2014, he pulled out a knife during a bar fight in Wisconsin, and a man was stabbed. He was convicted and sentenced to jail. His co-stars distanced themselves publicly. When the Saved by the Bell reboot was produced, he was the only original cast member not invited back. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer in January 2021 and died just weeks later at 44. He spent his final years almost entirely estranged from the people who had been his TV family. 8. Danny Bonaduce. Danny Bonaduce played Danny Partridge on The Partridge Family and was one of the most charming kids on television. The show made him famous before he understood what fame actually meant. By his teens, he was using substances, and the pattern never broke. He was arrested for buying heroin from an undercover officer in 1990. He had multiple further arrests, including a violent incident in Phoenix in 1991. He filed for bankruptcy. He was found sleeping in his car. He went through multiple divorces and rehabilitation programs. He eventually became a radio personality and reality television fixture, turning his own destruction into content. He has been more honest than almost anyone about what child fame did to him. His survival is real. But the road was genuinely ugly. 9. Macaulay Culkin. Macaulay Culkin was not just a child star. He was the biggest child star in the world. Home Alone made him a phenomenon, and his television appearances made him a fixture of American pop culture. But his father was managing his career and his earnings in ways that were deeply troubling. When his parents divorced, the custody battle was largely about control of his money. He retired from acting at 14. He resurfaced years later with reports of serious substance use. He was arrested in Oklahoma in 2004 with heroin, Xanax, and marijuana in his possession. He denied addiction publicly, But the physical changes over those years told a different story. He has since rebuilt himself substantially and appears genuinely stable today. But there were years where one of the most famous children who ever lived was nearly invisible for all the wrong reasons. 10. Leif Garrett. Leif Garrett was a teen idol in the late 1970s who appeared in multiple television productions before crossing into music. His face sold millions of magazines, and he was the prototype for the Hollywood Golden Boy before the world knew what that even meant. But in 1979, he was driving drunk and crashed his car. His passenger and close friend Roland Winkler was left partially paralyzed by the accident. Leif walked away physically. He never fully walked away from the guilt of what happened that night. He spent decades battling heroin addiction and was arrested repeatedly throughout the 1990s and 2000s on drug-related charges. A VH1 Behind the Music special in 1999 showed his decline in genuinely painful detail. He was arrested at a Los Angeles subway station in 2010 with heroin in his possession. He has said in interviews many times that the guilt over Roland Winkler never left him. The crash that broke his friend broke something essential in him permanently, too. 11. Corey Feldman. Corey Feldman was everywhere in the 1980s. Stand By Me, The Goonies, The Lost Boys, television appearances across the entire decade. One of the most prolific young actors of his generation and someone who seemed genuinely destined for lasting stardom, but he has spent decades saying out loud what the industry tried very hard to keep quiet. He was abused as a child actor by people with power over him, and so were many of his peers. He watched his closest friend, Corey Haim, spiral into addiction and eventually die. And he has said openly that the abuse they both suffered was the root of it all. He battled his own addiction and was arrested on heroin charges in 1994 during a period when his career was already struggling. He has made increasingly erratic public appearances over the years that made it easy for people to dismiss him. But everything he has been saying since the 1990s about the systemic abuse of child actors has been slowly proven right by everything that has come after. He survived. But survival has a visible cost that shows on him every time he appears in public. 12. Willie Aames. Willie Aames was a regular on 8 is Enough and became a household name as Tommy Bradford, one of the 8 Bradford kids the whole country tuned in to watch. He followed that with Charles in Charge alongside Scott Baio and seemed set for a long and stable career. Instead, he fell hard into alcohol and drug addiction as the work gradually slowed down and the industry moved on without him. He filed for bankruptcy in 2009 and at one point was reportedly homeless and living in a car in Kansas. He gave an interview from a garage at that time describing in quiet detail how completely his life had collapsed since the cameras stopped. He turned to religion as a lifeline and has spoken extensively about faith as the thing that pulled him back from the edge. He avoided the worst ending. But the distance from Tommy Bradford to homeless in Kansas is so vast it is almost impossible to comprehend. Fame is not a cushion. For Willie Aames, it turned out to be a trapdoor. 13. Danny Pintauro. Danny Pintauro played Jonathan Bauer on Who's the Boss for 8 seasons alongside Tony Danza and Alyssa Milano, adorable on screen, grew up in front of millions. After the show ended, he studied at Stanford and tried to continue acting, but could never escape the shadow of Jonathan Bauer. In 2015, he went on television and revealed he was HIV positive, disclosing that he had been living with the diagnosis for years. He spoke openly about methamphetamine use and how it had contributed to his situation. He wanted his story to be a warning. The boy from Who's the Boss spent his adult years fighting battles his childhood fame left him completely unprepared to face. 14. Jamiee Foxworth. Jamiee Foxworth played Judy Winslow on Family Matters from the very beginning, a core part of the Winslow family. Then in season 4, Judy walked upstairs to her room and was never seen or mentioned again. No farewell, no explanation. The writers erased her from the show's history when Steve Urkel became the focus. For a young actress, being literally written out of existence is devastating. The financial and emotional struggles that followed were severe. She eventually entered the adult film industry trying to make ends meet, a path born from desperation after Hollywood had already discarded her. She has spoken about that period with honesty. She was a child the industry used and then threw away. What came after was the industry's failure as much as her own. 15. Jeremy Miller. Jeremy Miller played Ben Seaver on Growing Pains for 7 seasons, the youngest son and the family prankster who got some of the show's best comedic moments. He grew up on that set alongside Kirk Cameron and a very young Leonardo DiCaprio, who joined the cast in later seasons. When the show ended, the transition to adult roles proved nearly impossible, and the phone largely stopped ringing. He struggled with alcoholism for years and has spoken about it with real honesty in multiple interviews. He said the drinking started as a teenager during the show itself and became a serious long-term problem once the structure of production was gone and he had nowhere to be every day. He entered rehabilitation multiple times across many years. He has talked about the specific way child fame leaves you completely unprepared for normal life, because you skip the years when most people quietly figure out who they actually are. He achieved sobriety and has spoken publicly about recovery. But the damage to his career was permanent, and the years of the struggle were real. 16. Jodie Sweetin. Jodie Sweetin played Stephanie Tanner on Full House, the middle sister famous for the catchphrase "How rude," charming, funny, genuinely loved by audiences. When Full House ended, she found herself completely lost. She started drinking heavily as a teenager and by her early 20s had moved to methamphetamine. She hid it well until 2006, when she gave an interview admitting the full extent of her addiction. At her worst, she was spending thousands of dollars a week on meth. She went through multiple rehab programs and multiple marriages that collapsed. She relapsed publicly more than once. She eventually achieved genuine long-term sobriety and returned for Fuller House, a real comeback. But the years between the two shows were brutal, and she has never once pretended otherwise. 17. Tiffany Brissette. Tiffany Brissette played Vicky, the robot on Small Wonder, the syndicated 1980s sitcom about an engineer who builds a robot girl and hides her in the family home. She spoke in a flat monotone and moved with mechanical stiffness for 4 seasons. The show became a cult hit. The problem was that Tiffany became Vicky in the mind of every casting director she ever met. She tried for other roles and could not get them. She eventually stopped trying. She went to college, became a registered nurse, and disappeared from public life by choice. Unlike most on this list, her story is not about addiction or crime. It is about a kid so completely defined by one role that the only way to find herself was to leave the industry that had consumed her identity entirely. 18. Edward Furlong. Edward Furlong became famous as John Connor in Terminator 2 at 13, one of the most celebrated child performances in blockbuster history. He transitioned into television work and continued acting through the 1990s. But addiction took hold early and never fully let go. He was arrested multiple times through the 2000s and 2010s for domestic violence incidents involving former partners. His physical deterioration became visible on screen in the few roles he managed to land. He violated probation multiple times. The roles became smaller and further apart. He had been one of the most promising young actors of his generation. He became instead a cautionary story referenced every time someone asked what happens to child stars. Still alive and occasionally working, but the distance from Terminator 2 to a succession of arrest records is a long and painful one. 19. Amanda Bynes. Amanda Bynes was one of the most naturally gifted comic performers of her generation. She carried her own Nickelodeon sketch show at 13 and starred in successful films and television projects throughout the 2000s. She seemed like the rare child star who had actually figured it out. Then in 2012, everything changed fast. Dewey arrests. A bong thrown from a high-rise apartment window. A fire set in a stranger's driveway. Multiple psychiatric holds. She posted increasingly erratic messages online and shaved her head in a moment that felt uncomfortably familiar to anyone paying attention to young women in entertainment. She was placed under a conservatorship. She has spoken about mental illness and made genuine efforts toward recovery. But the speed of the collapse from beloved child star to public crisis was shocking even by Hollywood standards. 20. Lisa Bonet. Lisa Bonet played Denise Huxtable on The Cosby Show starting at 16 and was one of the most effortlessly cool young actresses on television. She was given her own spin-off, A Different World. But she and Bill Cosby clashed repeatedly. She posed for a graphic photo shoot in a men's magazine without approval. She filmed a violent ritual scene in a film Cosby felt was incompatible with the show's image. She was fired from A Different World and eventually written off The Cosby Show. Her Hollywood opportunities narrowed sharply after the public falling out. She never rebuilt the mainstream career the early years had promised. She did not destroy herself the way others on this list did. But she is the clearest example of a child star the industry destroyed simply for refusing to stay in the box it had built around her.